This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
In general, to sponsor these shiurim, it's $300, $360 to be a postal sponsor. And of course, these shiurim are heard all over the world on many mediums, especially by my subscribers. You could subscribe to a weekly CD for $26 a month by calling 718-916-3100 or emailing me at rmmwsi@aol.com. We are about to finish Mishnayos Mikvayis. Mikvayis is, we learn 2 Mishnayos a day. We have our own line on the Global Coalition Network at 718-906-6471. If somebody wants to sponsor the next Masechta Nida, please let me know, 718-916-3100. We will begin this fascinating parsha, really a fascinating parsha. Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. Yaakov sent angels. Esav is coming, and he sees blood. And Esav came with a huge army, 400 generals, a huge force. And Yaakov parried this by sending a much greater force. It says, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, and Rashi tells us, Malachim Mamish. Actual Malachim. Now, Esav realized that it's, just not going to go. You can't battle Malachim. There's no way you can do that. The Rameh Mepramajlan says, where did Yaakov get this huge armada of Malachim? So, famous word from Rameh Pramajlan, he says a little bit unusual, Rashi's Lashon, Malachim Mamish. And he says Mamish is a mnemonic, Malachim Mimitzvahs Sha'asa. Mamish, Malachim Mimitzvahs Sha'asa. Malachim from the mitzvahs that he did. And therefore, it's actually what Yaakov says, Im Lovan Garti, and Rashi says, Tar Yag Mitzvahs Shamarti, I kept the 613 mitzvahs, and the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, in the 4th parak, Mishnah Yud Aleph, Ha'oisa mitzvah achas kaina loy praklik echad, if you do one mitzvah, you create for yourself a protector, a malach. So therefore, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, this huge battalion of Malachim that he had, were Malachim Mamish, Malachim Mimitzvah Sha'asa, Malachim from the mitzvahs that he performed. Now, I think that this idea is very important nowadays. We still have the reality of Malachim. Every week we sing Shalom Aleichem, we say Bayachem B'Shalom, we ask them Barchuni B'Shalom, and we even say Tzeitzchem L'Shalom to the weekday Malachim as we greet the Shabbos Malachim. The idea of Malachim plays a very big part in contemporary society when we're very nervous with what's going on around us. This is especially true in Eretz Yisrael. One of my Talmidim, Zush Motech, who came back from Eretz Yisrael, recently told me that this is the first time that when he was in Eretz Yisrael, he was acutely aware at all times of what was going on around him. And every time somebody passed him, he turned his head to see if they kept on walking. So the pasuk that says, Choyne Malach Hashem, an angel of Hashem camps, Saviv li'areyav, around those that fear him, Vayichaltzeim, and delivers him, and strengthens him. This is very important. We want to have Malachim around us to protect us. As it says, Ki Malachav Yitzavalach. His angels, he instructs, L'shmorcha b'chol asher telech, to guard you and wherever you go. There's a very big need for people to have Malachim around them to protect them, especially nowadays. And it dawned on me that we should be more aware of the midah keneged midah of mitzvahs that we could do that would encircle us. So, for example, somebody clothes the needy, gives clothes to the poor. Either you buy clothing for the poor, you give your clothing that's extra to the poor. There are many ways to do that. There's a place in Lakewood, Deja Nu, where the kollel couples can go into it and actually take off from racks beautiful clothing for themselves, for their children. And people regularly give clothing to this place called Deja Nu. There are other places in different boroughs where you could give clothing. When you give clothing to someone, you enwrap them in all directions. And Mida Keneged Mida, Hashem protects us in all directions. We should remember the schus of the nanuim of the lulav. You remember when we did the nanuim of the lulav? And we do it in front of us, in the side of us, in back of us, that Hashem should protect us in all directions. We need that at this time. But it's not only the positive things. It's also the negative, the lo says, that a person doesn't speak bad about somebody behind his back. Right? What does the pasuk say? Orur makere eyu basaser. Cursed is he who hits his friend in secret, who stabs his friend in secret. That means talking behind somebody's back. Right? We have to be careful that we work on that. Or I give you another example. There are people that can't help themselves and they gape at women. And they look at women and they do it when the woman's back is turned, that she shouldn't notice. We're not supposed to do that. When we work on that, it protects us also from behind us. These are things that we should do to create praklitim, to protect us on all sides. Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim the son of El Esav Achiv Arza Seir Stay Edom. So very interesting diktuk Rashi. I know a lot of people, they have a hard time with the diktuk Rashis. You know, oh, you're diktuk Rashi. But here Rashi says a simple rule in diktuk. It says Arza Seir. So Rashi says it could have said Le'eretz Seir. And any time, instead of the lamed in the beginning, it could be replaced with a hey at the end. So in this case, instead of saying Le'eretz Seir, it says Arza Seir. So the question which is asked is, well, and you know, asked this, a great Admor, the Rebbe Mivarka, Zechat Tzadik L'Brachas Chus Yagan Aleinu, says, well, what's the difference? Then what did we benefit by putting a hey at the end instead of a lamed in the beginning? So the Rebbe Mivarka says that if you don't have to say it now, then push it off to later. You might have to say it, but if you don't have to say it now, push it off to later. So you don't have to have the lamed now, let's put it later and make it a hey at the end of the word. He says, why? Because shtika is always better. It's always better to be quiet. If you're not sure you have to say it, you might have to say it later. Now, before I elaborate on this, because we're talking about over here a very important point, but let me tell you that Rav Avram Chechanov said it a little differently. Rav Avram Chechanov says that even if you have to say as little as possible. So he says it's a question of saying either Le'eretz or Arza. A hey barely makes a sound. A hey is clearly. Arza, you don't even notice the hey. Le'eretz, the lamed makes a sound. Rav Avram Chechanov says if you have a choice, say less. Because Gedoyla Shtika, we all know that it says in the Mishnah, I did not find anything better for the body than shtika. Now, you have to understand that the difference between an animal and a man is that we're a medaber. We speak. Like the Targum says in Bereshis, L'nefesh chaya, l'ruach memalala. The defining feature and characteristic of a human being is speech. Speech is not cheap. Now, we live in a country, a wonderful country, a malchus shel chesed, but there's one thing about our country: talk is cheap. There's freedom of speech. You could say what you want. People talk, their mouths are like a sewer. And no one can tell them to stop. Don't tell me how to talk. There's freedom of speech. Talk is cheap. In reality, that is the antithesis of Yiddishkeit. The antithesis of Yiddishkeit is that talk is absolutely not cheap. There's a Gemara in Masechta Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Tes Amud Beis. My Talmidim have heard it from me over and over again. I consider it one of the most important Gemaras in Shas. The Gemara says, we know Adam la'amal yulad. That's a pasuk in Mishnah. But the Gemara says, Eini yodayim la'amal ma'isa nivreim la'amal pen nivra. We're not sure if a person was created primarily to do or to talk. Kishu Aimar, and this is a pasuk in Mishlei. Kishu Aimar ki ochaf alav biyu. You should have a saddle on your mouth. Heavy Aimer Adam Lamal Penivra. Which means the greatest arena for achievement in life is the mouth. It's an amazing statement. And therefore we have to know that when it says in the Mishnah Pirkei Avos, Kol Yomai Gadalti Bein HaChachamim V'Lo Matzotzi L'Guf Toiv Mishtika. I didn't find anything better than shtika. It means that if a person doesn't talk unless there's a purpose, that person is valuing. He has a saddle on his mouth. She has a saddle on the mouth. Now, don't get me wrong. Talking to your wife, to your husband, is a big purpose. Somebody sits there. His wife, he comes home, his wife, the whole day she's starving to be talked to. She's busy with the gibberish of the children the whole day. She's starving from some human companionship. That's not the time for the husband to practice shtika. That's proper use of the mouth. A saddle doesn't mean that we don't ride the horse. Of course we have to ride the horse. In the olden days when they didn't have a car, they rode the horse to pick up supplies. They rode the horse to oversee the safety of their fields. They rode the horse to help a sick child to deliver a baby. But why do we have a saddle on a horse? In order to control the horse. It shouldn't veer off the road. It shouldn't start kicking people. It shouldn't behave wildly. That's the purpose of the saddle on the mouth. The saddle on the mouth is a person has control of their mouth. They know when to talk. There's a famous word from the Maggid Memezerich. Pasuk says in Tehillim, Lo roga ala l'shaynai. And says the Maggid Memezerich that by most of our Evarim we should get a regilus. We should get used to running to mitzvahs. We should get used to helping people. We should develop a regilus. He says, not by the mouth. Don't develop a regilus, and everything in the mouth has to be messinas, with thought. Person has to think before they speak. People that don't think before they speak get themselves into trouble. Especially with your spouse. I know as devarim. A wife's dimosam mitzuya, her tears come out quickly. A person has to think before talking. To tell a wife, that's so dumb. God forbid to say that to a wife. Dimosam mitzuya. A person has to have a saddle on their mouth. To say to a husband, that's just like you to be so inconsiderate. That person doesn't have, and that's not part of life. That's, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that's the main purpose of life. Odom lamal pen ivra. It's so important. Really, we could have a whole shir on this, but we have to go on. Ad to say your stay adayim. The Shachal HaTorah says that Esav deliberately called the names of his land Seir and the name of his city, the name of his land Seir and the name of his field Edom, because he never wanted to forget what Yaakov did. He was afraid that maybe after a while the anger might diminish, the pain might lessen. He didn't want to let that happen. So he called his land Seir to remember that Yaakov took the Gidiyah Ezim to make believe that he had hairy hands to steal the brachas. He called his field Edom to remember the red lentil soup that Yaakov gave him to trick him into selling the firstborn. No, Esav did it as Shachal HaTorah. Esav did it in order that it shouldn't be forgotten his hatred. Now, we use names the other way around. We use names to remember good things. It's a very big tool, a name. Sometimes we give a name after a parent, because every time we call the child, we remember a parent. We remember the lessons of the parent. And this year we talked about many times that names are given to remember if there was a miracle, like a name Ganesha, which is the letters of Neis Gadol Yasham. I've said this before, but I'll give you just a simple example. My oldest daughter, Chani, when she was 6 years old, she ate a tainted piece of meat that had E. coli, and she contracted from the poison hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is a virus that shuts down the kidneys and makes the blood sandy. She had to be rushed to the hospital. She was put on peritoneal dialysis, and she needed a transfusion every day. And she was between life and death for quite a few weeks. I could tell it to you now. She's married with children, but this happened 25 years ago, a quarter of a century ago. But at the time, my wife and I had 4 other little babies, and we left them with other people, and we stayed in Columbia Hospital, Babies Hospital Presbyterian, around the clock. First she was in ICU, then in step down. At that time, I gave a shiur to about 250 people a night in Daf Yomi, at that time in Aguda, 14th Avenue. And I lived in the hospital. I didn't leave the hospital. I remember I mailed out tapes. There was a mailbox on the bottom floor, and I had my machinery in the room, and I said the shiur, and I mailed the tapes from the room. And I learned there, staying by the bed. But as Aaron will remember, Aaron was there then. Every night a car came and picked me up from Washington Heights, took me to the daf, and brought me back. And it was tremendous Mesiras Nefesh, because I was so wiped out from all the tension throughout the day, and I had a young wife. My wife was a young Rebbetzin then, and she was very nervous, and we were worried about the other babies, the other children. But every night I was picked up. I went the hour trip, hour and 15-minute trip, and said the shiur, and then came right back, and was brought right back to the hospital. A year, she got better after 5.5 weeks, Baruch Hashem, and a year later we made a Suda Soida, and her name is Chana Weiss, and I told my wife, let me figure out a gematria, because everybody likes a gematria. The gematria of Chana Weiss is 155. With Weiss we spell Vav Vav Yud Yud Samach, and that's exactly the gematria Daf Yomi. And we were saying the whole time that in the schus of the Daf Yomi she would get better. Whenever I say Chana Weiss, I think about Daf Yomi. And that's the tool of a name. Esav used it l'ra. We use it l'toy, right? Moshe Rabbeinu called his son Eliezer, Elikei Avi Be'ezri, Ve'atzileinu Micharev Para. Right? Remember, Esther was... She was hidden. Ein Esther Magedes Zamo Vesmaladita. Noach is Motzachem Beinei Hashem. Moshe is Oisias Hashem, because I wrote upon him K'Moshe. Now, this that Esav did to always remember bad, that's what we try to forget. See, we're not an Esav. We have a halacha loisikem v'loisitem. We don't take vengeance and we don't bear a grudge. That means we clean the slate. We don't harbor ill will. There are families that feud for generations. They're not Torah-dika people. They're not Torah-dika people. People don't keep feuds in their mind. No, with those people we don't talk. We remember what they did. We don't remember what they did. That's an issue of loisitar, of bearing a grudge. Yet, we announce, Yeska, there are things that we're supposed to remember. There are things, and since we're on this, I'm going to leap forward a little bit in the Parsha. We say that Yaakov Avinu says, Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden hazeh. With this staff I crossed the Yarden. What's Yaakov Avinu doing? Says Rabbeinu Bachya, Yaakov is remembering the bad times. There was a time that Eliphaz took everything from me and all I had was a walking stick. I didn't even have clothing because I had to give him everything. Because only Choshev Kameis, that was instead of killing me. So Kibamakli of Artias Yadin, I said, all I had was my staff. Rabbeinu Bachya says it's important. We don't like to remember the bad times. As a matter of fact, there's a Goyish song, those were the days, my friend, I thought they'd never end. And many people sing it with gusto because the past looks good, because they wiped out all the bad and they only remember the good. Selective memory. But Rabbeinu Bachya says we're supposed to remember the bad. You know why? Because then we could say, Hoidul Hashem, that it's not that way anymore. I remember a time I didn't have any money. Now, Baruch Hashem, I'm not so tight. Hoidul Hashem, ki tayv, ki laylam chastai. I remember the time that I was dating, I never thought I'd get married. Hoidul Hashem, ki tayv, ki laylam chastai. Remember a time I didn't have friends. I have friends, Hoidul Hashem. And not only that, but we also remember the good times. Sometimes people go through a bumping time. They're supposed to remember the good times. Like Hashem teaches us, I remember. Rav Victor Miller used to say, if a couple is having a bumpy time, let them take out the chasana pictures. Remember the good times. David HaMelech says, I don't forget all the things that you've done for me. Now it's interesting, on this pasuk, the Turan Chumash asks a lot of pshat kashas. It's a big pshat kasha. When Yaakov told Esav, Ki b'makli avarti es Yarden hazeh, he was nowhere near the Yarden. So what does he say? With my staff I crossed this Yarden. You say this when you're pointing at something. But he wasn't pointing at anything. What do you mean? What does it say? So it's interesting that the Torah says, so seyu ha-mikra. You have to transpose the mikra. And it should be read as if it says, Ki b'makli hazeh avarti es Yarden. Because I split the Yarden with my staff, right? That was the wondrous staff. It should be read, that's a big chiddush that we transpose the Mikra. It's interesting because the Ger Rebbe, the Imrei Emes, says a different shot. In concert with what we were just talking about, Yaakov Avinu was so grateful for that miracle that Hashem split the Yarden, that it says, if it was in front of him now, he saw it as if it was in front of his eyes. Vayishlach Malachim El Esav Achiv. So here we have the Medrash opens up the discussion of this subject. You know, a lot of times we have that the Medrash Rabbah says that the Rabbanan open up a discussion with a pasuk from Tanakh. So here we have Rav Huna Pasuk. Rav Huna opened up this discussion of Yaakov sending Malachim to Esav. Malzik ba'oznei kelev oiver. If you grab hold of the ear of a passing dog, Misaber al riv loyla, you're starting up with a quarrel that's not yours. In other words, here's a German shepherd walking merrily alongside you, and you go and chepper it and grab a hold of its ear and give it a pull. Are you nuts? That's what the pasuk says. Malzik ba'oznei kelev. You grab a hold of the ear of the dog. You're getting involved in an argument that wasn't yours. The Medrash continues. Shmuel bar Nachman Omar, another example. Moshel to a chief bandit, a real dangerous man that's sleeping by the crossroads. And you're walking past, and you say, "Heck, what time is it? Somebody says, are you crazy? You want to wake him up? He's a dangerous man. What are you waking him up for? He's sleeping, living with him, sleeping, get out of there. So the Medrash says, so too Yaakov. What are you sending a message? Vayishlach Yaakov el Esav Achiv, that here I am, Yaakov, I'm coming with Kroscha. Leave him alone. What are you starting up with him? So of course, the Medrash is a little bit of a perplexing. Medrash is perplexed. What do you mean? You know Esav has a bloodlust against Yaakov. Esav never, we just said, he called his city and his field by names. Never to get, he said, Yikaru Yemei Evalavi, and I'm going to kill him. You know, Esav is not forgetting what Yaakov did. Yaakov has to appease him. What does the Medrash mean? It's like pulling the ears of a dog. I mean, Yaakov has to do something to placate him, to try to stop him from his murderous pursuit. So all the Mefarshim learn Pshat in this Medrash. Aitzis Panini Torah brings down. They all learn Pshat in this Medrash that Yaakov was learning Torah. If you're learning Torah, you don't have to worry. Just let sleeping dogs lie. You're learning Torah, you don't have to go through all these machinations if you're learning Torah. You don't have to. There's a remarkable story told by Rav David Favarsky. David Favarsky was the Shiva of Panovich before Rav Shach. And he said that when they were in the Vardik, there was a convention of communist leaders that was being held right across the street of Yeshivas Navardik. Now, of course, to learn Torah at that time was a death sentence. So the Hanhola of the yeshiva wanted to close down the yeshiva during the convention. I mean, right in the face of all these communist leaders, you want to be learning Torah? And the Alta from the Vardik says, we're not going to close down the yeshiva. That's just what the Sutton wants. Then we're in danger. We're not closing the yeshiva. So, okay, the Alta from the Vardik is boss. They continued learning in the Beis Medrash with great fear. And of course, they heard the commotion, and they came with rifles drawn, rushing into the Beis Medrash, ready to shoot. What they see in the Beis Medrash? They saw hundreds of Bachrim screaming at each other. No, that's not what a Abaya means. That's not what Toises means. It looked like a crazy house. It looked like a nut house. And in Russia, to start up with crazy people was a tremendous sin. So they ran right out. Rabbi Pravosky says the story. People that learn Torah, Hashem takes care of them. Now, I'll tell you, there's a wonderful story about the Koyach HaTorah. The wonderful story that is told by the Chavetz Chaim. In Radin, they were making a new hospital in Radin, a Batei Cholim. And in order to make the hospital and get it off the ground, what they did is they made a parlor meeting of the richest Jews in the area, and the idea was to raise money for a bed. That was the angle. In other words, each Gevir was asked, each rich man was asked to donate a bed. A bed means they'll pay for the room with the bed, with all the machinery that goes on with the bed, the nurse that's needed for that bed. They were raising money, and they were asked to donate a certain amount of thousands of rubles for a bed. And one rich person said he'd give half a bed, another person said he'd give one bed, and the richest man said he's ready to give 2 beds. And the Chavetz Chaim was giving great cover to the people. Wow, Kol hamatzal nefesh achas miyisrael, kilu matzal oilam malei, and you're doing like Hashem. Hashem is mechayes kulam, and you're also being mechaye people. You're doing like Hashem, who is roifei cholei amo Yisrael. He was giving the Gevirim tremendous cover. All of a sudden, a few Kol Jungelite came in, and the Chofetz Chaim stood up for them and gave them tremendous cover. And it didn't sit well with the wealthy people. What are you giving them? They're young guys. We're dealing in dinei nefashos, and we're talking about tens of thousands of rubles, and you're giving them such covet. So Chofetz Chaim says, "What do you mean? You see this young man, and he takes one Kol Jungelman. You see this young man? He gave 50 beds." So the Gevir looks. Oh, I didn't know his father was one of the great 50 beds. What is his father? His father is a banker? He says, no. Because of his learning, 50 people won't get sick. That's what the Chofetz Chaim said. Because of his learning, because of this young man's learning, 50 people won't get sick. We don't need 50 beds because of him. That's the Koyach HaTorah. So the interesting Shaila asked to the Ben Ish Chai. Somebody wanted to know, he had a big sum of money. He wanted to know if he should build a yeshiva or a hospital. Interesting Shaila. So the Ben Ish Chai told him he should build the yeshiva. He says, if the hospital is needed, you'll get people to give money for the hospital. But you won't get people to give money to the yeshiva. That was the Ben Ish Chai's answer. Rav Zilberstein says, and he says, it's interesting, he says he heard from a great gadol, but he doesn't say which gadol. He says he heard from a great gadol a different answer. Give money to the yeshiva, because if you have the yeshiva, you won't need the hospital. That's the Koyach HaTorah. Now I'm going to tell you a related shaila that was asked to Rav Steinman. You know, you hear these shailas, and you hear the answers, and you understand what it means. Das Torah. Einei ha'eda. Somebody came to Rav Steinman, a millionaire, a multi-millionaire, and told him that for quite a few years he's been giving a large amount of money to a mainstream yeshiva. We're talking about in the millions. He says this year he was approached by one of the premier pioneers in Bali Tshuva movement, and was asked that he needs a large sum of money to make in a certain city a Bali Tshuva yeshiva. And that if he doesn't succeed in making the yeshiva, a lot of lives will be lost. So this person, this Gevir, came to Rav Steinman, and he told him that he's thinking of shifting his money from the mainstream yeshiva to give it to this Baal Tshuva movement. And he says his logic is that if you don't give it to the yeshiva, the boys will continue learning. Maybe their Gashmias won't be as good. They'll continue learning. But if they don't make that Baal Tshuva yeshiva, there will be a lot of people that won't become religious. Their spirituality will be lost. To me, it sounds like a wonderful argument. Rav Steinman told this man, do you think that the Baal Tshuva movement comes by itself? It's something that just happened? He said it's the learning in the Beis Medrash that creates the avir that causes the Baal Tshuva movement. Your giving money to the mainstream yeshiva is what makes the Baal Tshuva movement possible. Amazing thing. And I thought to myself that could be another meaning of what it says, Gedoyla Talmud, Shat Talmud Mivir L'dei Maisa. So we always translate, well, learning is great because it teaches us what to do. But now we see Gedoyla Talmud, Shat Talmud Mivir L'dei Maisa. Talmud brings the Maisa. You know, with all this talk, in a lot of neighborhoods, this past Shabbos was Hatzalah Shabbos. And I'm a big proponent of Hatzalah. I always make a very successful appeal for Hatzalah. And it's a no-brainer. Buy a defibrillator. We got in Staten Island a 4-wheel drive ambulance so that it should be able to navigate the snow. We're talking about Dvarim Shalom. We're talking about saving lives. Maybe our lives. The lives of our loved ones. It's a no-brainer. But as great as it is to give money to Hatzalah, to give money for Torah, to give money for Rebbeim, to give money for Keilim, they ensure that Hatzalah shouldn't be necessary. Now, if you notice, I'm talking fast because I have a lot to say today and not enough time. On the subject of Tamchei Torah, there's a famous verse from the Chavetz Chaim about the Gid Anosha. You know, we don't eat the sinew of the thigh bone. Al Kain lo yoichlu b'nei Yisrael Gid Anosha. One of the reasons, it's a reminder that Vayavosa Yaakov Levadai, we allowed our father to be alone, and therefore it's a reminder throughout the ages that we should make sure to escort people, especially in today's climate, and let them go alone. And the Ger Rebbe asks, but what was the knas? We know that we passion Gid Anosha in Batam, it's Kates Ba'alma. And the Sefer Yagdil Torah answers that the knas was that we have to do nikr, and we have a whole process where we have to carve it out, which is a great tercha. But the Chavetz Chaim says that when Samkel, saw that he wouldn't be able to prevail over Yaakov, that his Torah protects him. Vayarki lo yochel. Vateka bekaf yerech Yaakov. So he started up with the spoon of the thigh of Yaakov. That's what supports the person. That's the Tomchei Torah. When the Yetzer wasn't able to get the people that learn Torah, so he went after those people that support Torah. With the idea that if you don't have the support for the Torah, then the Bnei Torah will diminish, the Bnei Torah will lessen. And we have that. We have today that he's succeeding. You know, the market isn't good. I can't take my money out. I never know what's going to be. It's not like it used to be. Money is tight. I'm not so liquid. And the Yetzer Hara goes after the Tomchei Torah. The Chavetz Chaim says that's the idea of the Gid Anosha, that the Yetzer Hara goes after the Tomchei Torah. But you'll see that in the Chavetz Chaim in Shmiras Halosh in Shara Torah Perek Vav, he gives such chizik to those that support Torah. He says even if somebody is an Am Haaretz, if he supports Torah in the next world, he'll be taught all of Torah. It's an amazing thing that the Chavetz Chaim says. There's a famous Maisa with Reb Chaim Volozhin. Famous Maisa. Whoa. Reb Chaim Volozhin was learning Kloyim. Now, the great Reb Chaim Volozhin, the head of Volozhin, the premier yeshiva, the father of all yeshivas, mother of all yeshivas. Reb Chaim Volozhin, those that learn Mishnah's Kloyim know how complicated, how intricate it was. Reb Chaim Volozhin was learning a Mishnah in Kloyim, and he couldn't figure it out. Of course, on his level, with all the intricacies, how it merges with all the puzzle of all of Kloyim, he couldn't figure out the Mishnah. He went to sleep, and he had a dream, and a tailor in Volozhin that passed away came to him and explained him the intricacies of the Mishnah. So in wonderment, Reb Chaim Volozhin asked in his dream, "Aren't you the tailor that lived in this street?" He said, "Yes." "You never learned Torah. You never learned Gemara. How do you know all of this?" He says, "Well, I had a pushka in my shop, and whatever profit I made, I took 50% for myself, and 50% I gave to poor Talmidei Chacham. When I came to this world, they taught me all of Torah." And Chaim Volozhin commented on this dream that he knew that it was so, but he didn't know that they would be able to mass so much learning so fast that the great Reb Chaim Volozhin, the Talmudist of the generation, is being taught by a tailor from the next world. Chavetz Chaim says over this story. You have to realize, as I mentioned in the shir last week, there's a lot of discussion about the failing of our system of supporting boys that are learning, what does the middle class do? And that's a big problem. And it needs to be addressed carefully and quickly. It's not being addressed enough. It's a very big problem. But there are people that are capable to support boys that are learning, and they also say, what? That doesn't make sense. It's not a free-for-all. He shouldn't freeload. He should be able to take care of himself. I made myself. You have to know if you have money to support someone in learning. Especially if you're not able to learn because you're busy with business. Do you know what a gift, what a boon, what an opportunity that is? You know that Gemara says in Sanhedrin that also, if you support learning, it helps one to achieve kapora l'avonos. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin Kuf Beis Amud Beis, Achav Melech Yisrael, Af Shahoya Oived Avodah Zara, because he was Mahana Talmidei Chacham Min Echasav, Kippur Lo Machza. Because Achav, although he was Oived Avodah Zara, but since he supported Talmidei Chachamim from his property, it would atone for half his sins, 50%. And the Maharsha says, Kal v'chomer, if a person is not an Oived Avodah Zara, what supporting Torah will do for him? Ramosha Chagiz, the famous Sfardi Chacham, says that when a person supports Torah, Shluchei Shel Adam K'maiseh, it's as if he's learning Torah. And not only does he have Olam Haba, but he has Shtei Shulchanos. Like it says, Smach Zevulam B'tzei Tzachar. It mentions it before Yisachar. Now just to not leave Gid Anosha without mentioning the Chinuch. The Chinuch writes, Mishroshe HaMitzvah, the sinew of the thigh bone, that it's forbidden. It's to remind us that Klal Yisrael will never be destroyed. Just like Vayarki Lo Yachalai. So although throughout the ages Esav will be able to hurt us, but it's a guarantee that we don't eat the sinew of the thigh bone. It's a guarantee that Klal Yisrael will never be interrupted. And this guarantee we saw, there were people that wanted to wipe us off the face of the map. That was their mission. From the final solution of Parah and Yitzchak Malay to Haman HaRasha, to Antiochus, they wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. To Hitler Yamach Shemai and his final solution, to Chmielnitsky and his horrors. But that's the Gid Anosha. That's the reminder of the Gid Anosha. And finishes the Chinuch, and just like the Shemesh came out and healed Yaakov, so Lasad Lavai Bebeheira V'Yamein, and the Mashiach will come and heal us as well. There's a very strong vote from the Netziv. Vayarki Lo Yachalai. The Sam Kael saw that he couldn't prevail. Vayiga B'Kaf Yerechai. Vateka Kaf Yerech Yaakov, and the sinew of the thigh of Yaakov was dislocated when he wrestled with him. Says the Netziv, he's also the head of the Lozhen, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, in his famous Pirush on the Torah, the Hamak Dover, says the Netziv that when the Malach saw that he couldn't prevail, he stopped. But Yaakov continued. Says, and of course this is only the Netziv could say this, and only on the level of Yaakov. Once the Malach stopped, Yaakov should have stopped. But Yaakov continued. And for being mamshich in the machlokes, that's why Yaakov was wounded. Look at the pasuk. Look how the Netziv learns the pasuk. Vayar kilo Yachalai. He saw that he couldn't prevail. Vayiga b'kaf Yerecha was touching his sinew. Vateka kaf Yerech Yaakov, it became disjointed. Why? When Yaakov continued struggling with it. If your enemy stops, you stop. People aren't that way. Now you want to stop? You want me to stop? Think about it in marriage. Your wife hurts your feelings. Then she comes to her senses. She wants to make up. Now you don't want to make up. Now you want to make up after you hurt me? That's being mamshlich b'machlokes. And that's what we saw from Moshe Rabbeinu. He went to Dasan Aviram. He wasn't machzik b'machlokes. But take a bekaf yerach Yaakov behefkeim. Your wife, your husband wants to make up. Make up. Stop. Remember, Gadol HaShalom. Now here's a fascinating example, a medrash, of a klal that Rav Moshe Zecher Tzadik, my Rebbe, said elsewhere, but it's even earlier in the Torah. It's really, really interesting. Vatigash gam Leah v'yoladeha vayishtachavu. Leah and her children bow down to Esav. V'achar nigash Yosef v'Rachel vayishtachavu. And afterwards, Yosef and Rachel came. So we know the famous Rashi that Yosef said, I don't want this Russia to set eyes on my mother. Rachel was fabulously beautiful. Right? So Yosef stood in front of Rachel to block her, and because of that he was blessed, Oilei Ayin, that he was never susceptible to the Ayin Har. It's an obvious question. At that time, Yosef was just 7 years old. Rachel was a full adult. How would 7-year-old Yosef be able to block the view of Rachel? To Pella. Says the Medrash, listen to this Medrash. Says the Medrash, it was a miracle. Yosef wanted to block him. Says it's a Medrash Rabbah, not a later Pirish. He wanted to block his mother. Hashem made a nace, and Gidol Kamoisa, he was all of a sudden elevated to be like her. The question is, but Yosef knew he was smaller than his mother. What would it help to stand in front of her? And the answer is, when you want to do something, you try to do what you can, and Hashem will finish the job. Rav Moshe says this about Bisya. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu already floated out 400 amas into the Suf. She stretched out her hand, and the shtarvava, it stretched out 4 amas, but why should she stretch out her hand? There's no way she could get it. Moshe says, you have to try. Lo yalecha hamalacha ligmar, but ve'ein ata ben chayrim libatal mimena. Now, Rav Moshe applies this to projects of Ruchnius. Says the shul wants to be bigger so they could accommodate more people learning. The yeshiva wants to enlarge itself so that they could give better facilities to the bakrim. But there doesn't seem to be a way to do it. So the board of directors says, forget it, it's pie in the sky. And Moshe says, by Ruchnius, you can't have it, everything dotted line before you do it. You got to reach, and Hashem will stretch out. Where else do we see this? It's coming to Hanukkah, Rabbi said. Before you know it, it's going to be Hanukkah. See it in Hanukkah too. They split up each night into an eighth of oil. What did they put it in? You need a share. It's not going to light. No, you do yours, and Hashem will do the rest. And that eighth filled up to be a full share. But you have to do what's yours. So that Yosef stood in front of Rachel, but he was only 7 years old. He didn't cover it. Says the Medrash, he was all of a sudden elevated to cover Rachel. The Sefer Asicha Nifloisecha talks about the power of benching. I'll know a little bit about power benching since I wrote the Sefer Power Benching. By the way, I brought with me tonight, since people might already want to start buying some Hanukkah presents, I have a few copies of Power Benching. I have my CD set for self-improvement. I have a meaningful living, passionate Judaism. Also, I brought with me a CD that I made for the first time by Rabbi Welch's shul. This Motzei Shabbos, I gave a shir on Shalom Bayis. So it was an hour and 25 minutes, so we managed to cut it down to fit on a CD that only takes 80 minutes. So it's a full 80-minute shir on Shalom Bayis. That'll be available. Also, there's a shir on Vayishlach that I gave 23 years ago. That's available as well. He tells a story about a man who he calls Reb Shimon. That you watched him, that whenever he benched word for word with great concentration. And he went over to this Reb Shimon and he said to him, where did you get such a devotion to benching? So he says, I'll tell you the truth. When I was 11 years old, I had the zechiyah to get fahered in the classroom by the great Rameir Shapiro, the author of Daf Yomi, the Rosh Yeshiva and founder of Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin. And Rameir Shapiro gave us a faher, and we did good. So he applauded that we were Mitziyonim, and he said he's going to give us a reward. Now, you think of a reward, you think of licorice, lollipops. He said, I'm going to give you a reward, I'm going to give you a secret for Atzlochas Achai, for success in life. Everybody is listening, 11-year-olds. He says, the Be'er Hativ, that if a person says benching Mila b'Mila, he will have Hatzlacha, and his Parnasa would be Berevach u'v'chavod kol yamav, and he'll be saved from af, anger, and ketzef, and he should try to bench from a bench. So he says, that remained me. That we were told this secret when we were 11 years old, that remained with me. He says, I always benched, and then I was taken to Auschwitz. And I faced Mengele, and he was making a selection. And it was clear that the children and the old people and the women were being sent to the left, and the men were being sent to the right. So he says he understood what was happening, so he stood up high so that he should look big, and they sent him to the right. But then he heard the Nazi was asking, what can you do, what can you do, what can you do? He couldn't do anything. He was a kid. So he thought about the benching. And he said, Hashem, I'm so young. All of a sudden somebody whispered in back of his ear, tell them that you know how to be a butcher. He says he knows how to be a butcher. So he sent him with this man to the butcher. And he had Parnasa b'revach u'v'chavod. He always had food with him. He says one day, one of the sadistic Nazi commandants came into the kitchen, and he didn't like that a kid was working in the kitchen. So he gave him a tiny little pickaxe, about the size of a hammer, and told him, listen, you don't belong here. But if you could make a hole in the ground here of 1/4 of a meter for men to hide when the Russians come, you could stay. In no way with this little axe was he breaking even the ground. And he got the shivers. But he said, Hashem, I remember what Rameir Shapiro said. And he started banging. Couldn't even break the ground. 1/4 of a meter deep. He knew he was finished. He would be sent to the gas chambers. But he said, Hashem, I remember I benched here always very carefully. In the meantime, a few Nazis came in, and they saw this kid banging on the ground, and they were making fun of him. They started throwing at him potatoes and melons and carrots. So he said, look at this. Parnasa b'revach u'v'chavod. He's covered with tomatoes, but it doesn't help him. He's shivering. All of a sudden, a bunch of Polish people came into the kitchen. And they thought he was in charge, and they were begging him for some food. So he said to them, well, I need over here a hole a quarter meter deep. If you make a hole a quarter meter deep, there's food for everybody. And 1, 2, 3, they dug the hole and he gave them melons and carrots and potatoes, and his life was saved. That's the koyach of benching. What a story. Now here you see there's a parsha in the Torah that you think you understand and you think you know. It was on the third day when they were in pain. So Shimon and Levi went, and they killed all the men. And always we know what they did. They said that you should circumcise yourself, and then we'll give you Dina. And then they all circumcised themselves, and on the third day, Shimon and Levi wiped them out. So we all understand why on the third day, because the pain is greatest on the third day. It's cumulative, and the pain is greatest. They were weaker from the pain, and that's why Avraham Avinu was visited on the third day when he was sick, and that's why the Gemara says that we could bathe the baby on Shabbos and the third day. However, that's not the only pshat. Some say Adarabah. The first day there's more pain. The famous teretz is that they didn't circumcise everybody until the third day. It took time to circumcise everyone. And they didn't finish it circumcising the whole time until the third day. So the third day, when everybody was in pain. However, the Pardes Shammai says something else entirely. And that is Shimon and Levi, although they were 12 and 13, they didn't want to attack a city out of anger. The Gemara tells us that if you come from the derech, you should not, if you come from the road, and this is in the older days when they didn't have a sitter, and davening needed a lot of concentration, you shouldn't daven for 3 days until you have Yishuv Adas. And therefore, the Gemara says that Shimon and Levi were worried that maybe they're angry. They didn't want to act out of anger. And therefore they waited 3 days. And says the pasuk, they saw that there was still pain. Even after 3 days, even after the anger dissipated. This is very important. Because you have to know that children need discipline. But there are certainly people that hit children out of anger. How can you do that? That's child abuse. You have to wait until the anger dissipates. You hit a child out of anger, out of frustration, that's child abuse. Now another thing. You think that's the only pshat. The Dazakain and Bali Taisa says a different pshat. Mamish, it's unbelievable how the Torah is nedreshes b'shivim panim. Vayihi b'yoyim ha'shlishi b'yoyisam koyav means on the third day when Shem started regretting doing the Milah. What did we do? This hurts. And when they started regretting what they were doing, they regretted what they were doing. Then they lost the schus, and then Shimon and Levi attacked. And that's why we say in our davening in Hashkivenu, V'hoser soton milfadeinu me'achareinu. Now what does that mean? One shot in that is, V'hoser soton milfadeinu, remove the sutton in front of us that says, don't get up, don't go to the shir. V'hoser soton me'achareinu, in back of us that's pushing us to do the Aveira, speak the Lashon Hara, talk in shul. There's another meaning. Before we do the mitzvah, telling us not to do the mitzvah. After we do the mitzvah, telling us to boast about the mitzvah. You know what I did? That's all. You know what I did? But also, before we do the mitzvah, telling us not to do the mitzvah. Afterwards, telling us to regret the mitzvah. I learned when I was I went to yeshiva. If I wouldn't have gone to yeshiva, I could have done this and that. I would be better off now. Never regret a mitzvah. If I wouldn't have given that quarter, I would have it now for the meter. Never regret a mitzvah. That's what's the certain me'achareinu. In Shechem, they regretted the mitzvah, and then they were vulnerable to Shimon and Levi. It was only after 3 days. V'yikach min abba b'yadai mincha le'esav achiv. He took min abba b'yadai. Very interesting Balaturim. He says, we all know about the animals, the goats, and all the different animals. But you know what the Balaturim says? Balaturim says, V'yikach min abba b'yadai, gems. He gave gems, he gave diamonds and rubies. That's min abba b'yadai. And he says, I'll prove it to you. Mincha is Begematria 103, and Avonim is 103. He gave them gems. And there's a Ibn Ezra Taka says like a riddle. Ibn Ezra was very, very clever, besides being one of the great Rishonim. He's very clever. So he says like this, if you read it, you have no idea what he's talking about. He says that Yaakov gave Esav Meis v'Raglov b'Seichai. Dead, something dead with feet inside it. What does that mean? Tell you the truth, I would have never figured this out. But it means Margolios. He gave him pearls. Margolios starts with a mem, ends with a saf, and has a raglov in the middle. That's Meis v'Raglov b'Seichai. That's Margolios. He gave him pearls. Now I think that there's a lesson over here. Yaakov wanted to appease Esav. That's why if a person hurts his wife, chas v'shalom, appease her with jewelry. We learned this from Yaakov. I remember hearing Rav Miller say, you said something not nice, make a trip to Simpson's. Rav Miller said, it was really not nice. You said, I hate you? Gotta spend a lot of money at Simpson's. I remember him saying it. We learned it from here. I also think jewelers that are in the jewelry business, they should have special kavanah in mincha. Now we hear mincha is gematria avonim. Im loven garti v'eicher ad ota. With love and I dwelled, and I tarried till now. Vayihili shor v'chamor. A Rav from Hamburg was together with one of the Ger Rebbes, I think it was the Imre Emes, and he said to him, how is it possible for Yaakov to live 20 years with Lavan and not to learn from him? We know a person, the Rambam says it's a rule. A person is mushpa from his environment. How could it be that Yaakov should live with Lavan 20 years and not be affected by him? Says the Rav from Hamburg, the key is, in Lavan Garti, I lived with Lavan, Vayihili Shor v'Chamar, and he was to me like an ox and a donkey. When you're with the guy, and you view the guy, not to treat them that way, we have to treat them nicely, but in my mind, he's not a mensch, he's a donkey. If you don't look at the guy as an equal, that's Havdalah. The difference between a guy, Yisrael and Amim, is the difference between night and day. The difference between Shabbos and a weekday. If you look at the guy, Amadoy Melech, you understand. Look, an animal talks like a sewer. Otherwise, you're going to start using those words too. If you look at him like an equal, well, he talks like a barn. They talk about their wives and what they do. As animals. It's like a chicken coop. So the key is, Vayili Shor v'Chamor, was like, and this is a great danger. It's a great danger when we view a guy like an equal. That's the famous Shalach HaKadosh. Hatzileini no miyadochi miyadesa. He only had one brother. Say miyadochi, what do you have to say miyadeisa? Says the Shalat, Sileni, if he's with me like a brother, if we're like equals, then that's a big danger. Hatzileni miyad ochi miyad Esav. If he's a brother, that's a bigger danger than when he's Esav. That's what it says first. It doesn't say miyad Esav, miyad ochi. It's a bigger danger if we're like brothers. Because what I could learn from him. All of the problems that we have today. I have a dear Talmud that's receiving these CDs from me for decades, who just sent me that his wife is leaving him for another woman. Wife is leaving him for another woman. That never happened by Yiddishkeit. But we learn from the Goyim, wie es Christel sich es Yiddel sich. Did our Meidlich ever want to dress the way they're dressing today? But they see it in the mall. They see it in the stores. They see it in the catalogs. Did youth ever have such brazen mouths before? But they hear it. They hear it in the Goyish songs that they listen to. They hear it on the radio. Frightening. Hatzileni no miyad ochi. Save us when we view the guy as an equal. Can't do that. Hey man, levodod yishkoin. So says Yaakov, says the Rav of Hamburg. The key is that Yaakov didn't view Lavan like an equal. Vayili shor v'chamor. We will have Be'ezus Hashem Mincha Marav here in about 3 minutes. I want to remind you that we have over here power benching, passionate Judaism, meaningful living. Those that want to subscribe to my CDs, even regular attendees, I send out CDs from the last 30 years, 718-916-3100. We also have the shir from Rabbi Welch's shul on Shalom Bayis. We have also the shir from 23 years ago on Vayishlach. If anybody wants to buy for Hanukkah presents, I have more svarim in the car. Reb Chananya ben Akasha Amaratza Kodesh Baruch Hu Lezaka Yitzis Yisrael Lafika Chir B'Lam Torah Mitzvahs Shenem Adinoi Chafetz L'man Tzidka Yagdil Torah V'Yad.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.